Well, Julie, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Lunch with a Leader. It is an honor to have you.
It is my great pleasure to be here with you. So thank you.
It's so funny. We were getting to talk a little bit before we got on. We have very similar paths about where we've been. We spent 4 years of college about an hour away from each other. What was Julie like growing up? Take me back to growing up, Julie. Who were you and where did you think you were going in life?
That's so funny. For the record, I've changed a lot since I was growing up. But the truth is, I actually grew up in a single parent household. My parents were divorced when I was 7, and it was the 70s. So the world was quite different then. And my mom had previously was a flight attendant. And in that time, flight attendants could not be married. It was a very glamorous job and they could not be married. So when she married my dad, she had to leave her flight attendant job. And then so she didn't work when I was born. And when my dad left, she started working a minimum wage job. So growing up, really, I was running the household. And I, at a very young age, had quite the list of chores and things that I did after school. And I learned how to vacuum and dust and paint walls and mow the lawn. And I had a paper route at a very young age and all the things. And the truth is, I really think that that gave me the work ethic that I've had throughout my whole life and career, because a lot of people would be like, oh gosh, you have to do all those things and da 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 da. And I mean, my mom knew how to stretch a dollar. Woo, she could make it work, right? But I really think that that gave me the gift of a really strong work ethic and great success in my career as a result of that. So we are all byproducts of our environment.
That's exactly right. You think back to that time, and when you're going through it, you can't see the good of it. When did the good of it finally hit you? When you went, well, maybe it wasn't the worst thing. Maybe those are things now that shape me. What age were you when that began to settle in, that these things are going to be formative to who I'm going to be in the future?
Gosh, I think it probably didn't really set in for me until I was at least in my mid 20s. And I started having some early success in my careers where people were recognizing my hard work and I would get promoted quickly and things like that just kind of kept happening. And they weren't happening by accident. They were happening because I was working really hard.
That's right.
And then I finally kind of connected the dots. Oh, maybe I'm such a hard worker and the work ethic is there because of that, not in spite of that. So yeah, anyway, yeah, that's probably when I really realized it. I don't think, even though I know you said we went to college an hour from each other, I don't think I really realized kind of my potential or how that adversity was going to impact me in a positive way. I don't think I realized it yet in college. I actually was having a lot of fun in college.
Yeah. Well, it's so funny. There's that old statement, we live life forward and we understand it looking backwards.
Yes.
And the things that we think will hurt us really will shape us. And the things we think are the best things sometimes turn out to be the worst things. So take me back to Julie. You're going to Radford University. What were your career aspirations at that point? Were you there to get just, I'm going to get a degree, I'm going to have fun, and then see what's next? What was Julie like in college?
I would say I always have been a little bit driven. It's funny because I'm going to just age myself right here. So I'm 54 years old and I just spent a weekend last weekend with my college girlfriends, and one of my girlfriends was also in my same major. So I was a marketing major, and she said, do you remember that project we did on United Airlines? And honestly, I didn't remember that it was a group project. I thought I did that project on my own. And she goes, you were grinding and you were just like, I just had some like random notes and I said I was going to wing it. And you did not like that idea of me winging it. You were like, no, we have to do it like this and da, 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 da. And I was like, oh, I don't even remember that. I don't remember having that intensity in college. but I guess I did. So anyway, I was a marketing major. And I honestly, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do long term, but my short-term goal at the time was I wanted to work in an ad agency after college. And which
Really?
I
How
did,
about that?
but that, I didn't know really the long-term vision at that point.
You know, it's so funny. These things, we are such a compilation of a life. And I look at the Julie now, you and I are basically the same. I'm a little bit ahead of you. I just turned 55.
Oh, it's
Just,
coming in a
oh,
couple
it's,
weeks, but I'm going to
uh,
hold on to 54 as long
hold
as.
on. My wife turns 54 tomorrow and she's like, don't bring it up. Don't talk about it. I don't want to
Yep,
even discuss it. I go to the credit card and I'm just keep scrolling down to find my birth date. It's not a good feeling.
I get it.
It is not a good feeling. But you go back to that. When did you learn the positive part of life? Positivity is such a piece of you now and a piece of what you do for a career. Where did you learn to shine and be positive? Was that something that was just natural? Was it something that you read or you heard? What would you say to that?
I would say I believe that every human has a little bit of a default position, and then their kind of surroundings either foster that default or kind of beat it down, right?
Yep.
So I believe I was probably born with some kind of positivity inside, but my mom really, I mean, both of my parents, but especially my mom, she always had that positivity. And she was the one who taught me at a very young age, you can manifest your destiny. And if you believe it, you can do it. And you're capable of anything. And just all of those positive affirmations before
Mm-hmm.
people were really talking about positive affirmations. She put those into me at a very young age. So yeah, I come by it pretty naturally. So the Jon Gordon stuff, it wasn't like, oh, this is revolutionary.
Yeah.
That was embedded into my DNA at a very young age.
It's so funny, the power of parenting, because
Yeah.
there's your mom facing every hardship known to man. I mean, she is going through it, leaving her career, basically starting over in a minimum wage job. What do you think Julie would be like if she had handled that differently? If your mom had taken that adversity and worn that adversity and dripped negative into you instead of positive into you, what do you think would be different about your life?
I think everything would be different. I really do. And I've seen it. The reason I say that is because I've seen this now with so many examples, not only in my life growing up, in my friends and the different kinds of parenting styles, but also with all the clients that I work with and all the things. And it's interesting that you brought up parenting because this is the third conversation I've had now in a week about the power of parenting.
Mm.
And I've said this for years. I believe that if we could fix the parenting problem in America, that we could solve a lot of our issues. And I know that's not what you asked, but I really, really believe that we need to gift our children with positivity and love and kindness and great examples for how to be a good human and all the things. So anyway, I think my life would have been completely different. I really believe, and my dad too. My dad is no longer living, but he was also, if you can see it, you can believe it, and you
Mm.
can do anything, and you have the power and all the things. So I never take that for granted. And I most certainly have passed that along to my own children.
What a massive thing that they did,
Mhm.
because you're doing it, we did it. Parenting isn't easy, and life isn't easy, and
It's
life is
not.
hard, and sending on positive, not negative, is not an easy thing to do. So here's Julie. She graduates Radford. You go on and you spend a ton of time at one of America's foundational companies, Hershey. How in the world did you get connected to them? And talk a little bit about your career track there.
Yes. So, oh, I love Hershey. And there's a saying inside the Hershey sales organization that says Hershey in your heart. And
Mm,
I've been gone for 8.5 years and I still have Hershey in my heart.
mm,
So anyway, I was living in Memphis, Tennessee. I was working for FedEx in their corporate marketing department. And I had some friends in Memphis that worked in the CPG industry, which is consumer packaged
yep.
goods. And one of them was in sales working for Colgate-Palmolive at the time. And she was like, oh, I love it so much. And CPG is so great. And da, 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 da. I was like, I think I could be good at sales. And she said, I've got a connection for a guy at Hershey. Interestingly, his name is Paul Coco. And I thought that was so funny.
That's
And so I
fantastic.
sent my resume to this guy, Paul Coco, and he lived in Richmond, Virginia. The position was based in Richmond, Virginia at the time. So I applied for the job and I got it. So I moved from Memphis to Richmond, Virginia, started my sales career there. And honestly, Paul and this other gal, Suzanne Jones, they were interviewing me together. They were like, yeah, she's not going to take this job. She has too much experience, blah, 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 blah. She's not going to like it, all the things, but they hired me anyway. And it was a step back. I had been in a corporate environment for 5 years. And the rule at Hershey is you have to start at the bottom, at the store level, like
Wow.
slinging cases, checking dates, throwing out old candy, all the things, like climbing on ladders in back rooms and building displays and doing all the things. But that's how you learn about the business. So I did that. And for the record, I didn't have the right clothes. I didn't have the right shoes. Like you need retail clothes for being able to go do that kind of grunt work, right? So anyway, I started at retail. I got promoted. I was very successful at it, even though it was hard. I mean, by the way, I remember calling Paul Coco on a payphone one day, and I said, Paul, there is rat poop on the gondola, which is the shelving at the grocery store. There's rat poop. Like, what do I do? Like, and I was thinking, why am I doing a job where I went to college, I have experience. Like, how did I get myself into this? And he's like, okay, you have to clean it up. You have to file an infestation report, blah, blah, blah. All this, just hilarious. Anyway, I did the retail job for about 9 months. Then I got promoted to the next role, did that for another 9 or 10 months, got promoted to the next role, so on and so forth. So that's where the work ethic piece came in. But I did a lot of roles in a number of different cities. And when I left Hershey about 8.5 years ago, I was leading what we called a food team. And that is grocery. For us, that meant grocery retail. Yep. So large grocery retailers all over the US. My team was running those businesses at my helm. And it was amazing. And a lot of struggles over the years, but a lot of great things. And I loved being a leader. I was an individual contributor for a long time, just cranking out the sales. And I was excellent at sales. And honestly, when I first became a leader, I wasn't a great leader at the beginning. And because I didn't know how, like you get promoted and then all of a sudden you're the boss of all your friends and your peers. And it's like, oh, I don't want to tell them hard things because I want them to like me and all the things. And I was micromanaging them because of course I was the best, right? That's why I got promoted. And it took me a minute to let go of the reins and learn how to empower people and learn how to give people constructive feedback so they could get better. And it was amazing. It probably took me about 6 months to figure it out. Once I did, all of a sudden, my people are excelling. My people are getting promoted. Somebody's getting plucked out of the company,
That's good.
But the truth is, none of us are good at something when we first step into it. We have to learn and make mistakes and just grow in the process.
What would you tell a young leader that is in that place where they're reporting rat poop right now? And they're like, listen, I am better than this. I see a title that I feel like I deserve to have. What would you tell them about if they will stick to the process, what they can learn in this season that will make them better later? What would you tell them?
Well, I would say 2 things. One is just figure out how to be great where you are, no matter where you are. I mean, the rat poop was a blip on the radar screen of all the other great things that I was trying to do and the relationships that I was building. And honestly, the successes like getting a big display or an end cap or something like that, like that's a big success, right? So you just have to figure out how to be great where you are. But the second piece that's really important, especially about kind of that whole idea of starting at the bottom and paying your dues. Nobody wants to do that, by the way. And I talk to my kids about this because my kids are almost 20 and 18 and they are like, oh yeah, I'm going to come out and I'm going to make money and I'm going to do all this stuff. I'm like, you have to pay your dues. But the thing about paying the dues, so when I was doing that retail job, despite some of the very grunt-worthy things that I was doing, if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have been successful when I got to the higher positions because
That's right.
I wouldn't know how the business works.
Mm.
That's how you learn how the business works. You learn by doing the business, by being in the weeds of the business and the back rooms of the business. And I just want to share one more example here because
No,
I
this is
think it
great.
will also connect. And this comes from my FedEx experience. One of the things that FedEx did when we worked in the corporate office that I thought was the most brilliant thing ever is they made everyone in the corporate office, I shouldn't say they made, but it was a requirement in the corporate office once a quarter to either go out and ride with a courier and deliver packages or work in the hub. Meaning working in the hub is you show up at 2 o'clock in the morning and you're slinging packages and loading containers and doing all those things while the packages are moving overnight. But what that did for us in marketing was it gave us a little bit of a reality check because we would be in marketing and we'd be sitting in these corporate office meetings and we would go, okay, let's make a flyer and let's have the couriers hand the flyer to the customers when they're out delivering packages and they can talk to the customers about all these things. Listen, they don't have time for that. You don't know that until you get on that
That's
truck.
right. That's right.
Hustle in those packages and you're running practically. I mean, you're not allowed to run, but you're moving.
Yep.
We don't have time to talk about our new marketing program. But we wouldn't know that if we were not out in the field. And it comes back to the same example with Hershey. If I hadn't started at the bottom and done the grunt of the business, I wouldn't have been able to have an educated conversation with the senior leaders of organizations later and say, hey, I get it. I know how it works at retail. I know what store managers are motivated by. I know how this works. And so I think that just knowing that experience, even though it feels kind of meh, maybe when you're in it, it's going to lead you to be successful later.
Here's Julie. You are at the height of your career. I mean, you're crushing. You're riding. You've been with Hershey long enough now. You've established a name. You have become a great leader within the organization. And then you hear a guy named Jon Gordon. And all of a sudden, something begins to shift in your life. So let's walk through that because there's a lot of leaders listening today that maybe at that point of their life, they're going, I make a great paycheck, but I am not feeling fulfilled. What was that like for you when that process, that unsettled season began to develop, when it didn't make any sense probably to anybody around you, probably your husband included, and he's going, what are you talking about? What are you doing? So talk a little bit about how you met Jon and what that process was of joining the Jon Gordon company, which was Jon Gordon right back then. The Jon Gordon company was Jon. So talk a little bit about that.
Yes. So interestingly, I had just joined what would end up being my last position with Hershey. So I was leading the big food team, the big grocery team all over the US that I mentioned to you. And I went out to meet my team in Boise, Idaho. And one of my guys had bought the energy bus for his team, which is now my extended team. And as his boss, he gifted me a copy of the energy bus. And he said, I really want you to read this book on your flight home. So of course I'm like, yes, I want to get to know my team, understand what they're excited about. And so I read the book on my flight home and I was like, oh boy, this is it. This is the way I'm going to lead. This is the way everybody should lead their team. And I went all in. I started becoming known as the energy bus inside Hershey. I was giving the book to my boss and all my peers. And I was just getting so excited about the work. And honestly, I started to use it. And what I found when I started to use the work from the energy bus is that not only was my team thriving when the business was good, which by the way is kind of easy to thrive when everything's going along the way it's meant to go along, but my team was able to thrive when the business got hard and the chips were down and the company wasn't making the number. And some of the things were getting a little bit hard. And a lot of teams were going like this and they were finger pointing. Well, it's marketing's fault. It's sales planning's fault. It's finance's fault. It's blah, blah, blah. It's so easy for people to shift to the blame. But what we really did is we said, we're not pointing fingers. We're going to look at ourselves in the mirror and we're going to get in a room and figure this out. How do we stay positive? How do we find a way forward? And the truth is it showed in our numbers. Wow. And that's what I love because when people would say, and I will tell you, and if there's anyone listening who has people kind of attacking them for being too positive, people were coming at me like, oh, she's just the positivity girl. And I'll tell you what I would do. I would pull out the numbers and tell them to look at the record. And why don't you look at the performance of my team compared to other teams and compared to overall company performance when the company was struggling? And why don't you tell me now if the positivity is really just the fluffy stuff, right? Because that's where it all connects. You don't have to choose between positivity and success.
That's right.
Actually the key to success. So anyway, all that to say, once I saw that impact with my team, I sent an email to Jon Gordon and I said, thank you so much for this book. It was so impactful. I love it, all the things. And he wrote me back and I was so surprised that he actually responded. So then I was like, I'm going to read another book. So I read The Carpenter and then I wrote another letter and then I read The Seed and I wrote another letter. And by this time, like The Seed was hitting me hard because The Seed is all about purpose. And I was like, oh, my purpose, I have to speak about the energy bus like that. By this time, The Seed is like growing inside me that I am meant to speak about the energy bus. So I invited Jon to come speak at a conference, a women's conference that's here in Charlotte, where I live. And of course, I volunteered myself to introduce him as well. So he comes to the conference. This is March of 2014. And I get on the stage and I introduce Jon. And he takes the mic and he goes, I think Julie's more passionate about my work than I am. And I was like, yes, I am. Yes, I am. I mean, the fangirling was so embarrassing. Like it was a lot. But that whole year of 2014, from March to December, I kept saying to my husband, the Jon Gordon thing, the Jon Gordon thing, the Jon Gordon thing. And he's like, what exactly is the Jon Gordon thing? And I said, oh, I'm going to be working with him next year. And so I wrote him an email at the end of the year of 2014. And I said, top 5 reasons why we should work together in 2015. And he called me a few days later. And again, we had built a little bit of an email relationship at this point. And he said, what do you want to do with this? And I said, I want to speak about the energy bus. And we had a long talk. He asked me how much money I make, all the things. And he said, I would recommend that you go out and speak about the energy bus for free before you quit your day job, which was an excellent idea, by the way. And I did that for 6 months. And I spoke to junior leagues and Rotary clubs and women's groups and really anyone who would listen to me speak about the energy bus. And then it was time. It was time to leave the corporate job and do it. So I did in late 2015, and I started speaking about the energy bus. And I had this great belief. So to your point about leaving the big corporate job, I had this great belief that I was going to be crushing it right out of the gate. I was not crushing it right out of the gate. I think I made my first year, I made maybe what I made in like one paycheck for like previously. And then the second year I made maybe what I made in a month. And then the third year, maybe I made what I made in a quarter previously. So year 3, and I just want to be honest, you asked me about this, like leaving
that's right.
Job, so I really want to be honest with your listeners. Year 3, my husband and I are having really hard conversations because I financially used to bring a lot to the table and now I'm bringing nothing, right? So we were having hard conversations and we just had to say, okay, we made a goal. It has to be this number by this date, or you have to go back and get a real job. A real job, right? A job that has this awesome thing called a direct deposit with benefits and bonuses and all the things. I didn't really, it's funny. None of us appreciate things like direct deposit and benefits and whatever until you don't have them. Now I'm used to it after 8.5 years, but it took a while to get used to that. So by the skin of my teeth, I barely made that number that we set for ourselves before the end of year 3. And I kept going, and it's a lot of grind. And I just want people to know that just because you want something to happen and you think it can happen, it doesn't automatically happen.
That's right.
It takes a ton of work and repetition and doing things over and over and over again. And also, oh, by the way, there's going to be doubt and imposter syndrome and all those things that come in. Like I said to myself so many times, who do you think you are to be a speaker? Like, whatever. But I had to regroup and reground myself and pour that belief into myself. Like, you can do this, and really believe in myself. And I also had to look at the record, because then when I really forced myself to look back at the record, when I would say to myself, who are you to think you can be a speaker? I realized that I spoke all the time at Hershey. I spoke at national sales meetings. I ran training groups. I spoke in front of big customers. I ran huge meetings. I did, like, I did it all the time. And once I kind of gave myself that evidence, I thought, you know what? Okay, girl, let's go.
That's
Keep
right.
going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. But I really just want people to hear that it wasn't easy peasy, and it wasn't without obstacles to get to this point.
Well, kudos to you for sticking in there. Kudos to your husband for sticking
Yeah.
in there, right? I mean, him
Yes.
believing in you. And it's so interesting, and I'm sure you've drawn this correlation many times. You lived out what your mom did, stepped out of a career and began over and began a new one. And really, in a lot of ways, Julie, you replicated in a different fashion what you had watched your mom do, and just put your nose down and go get the work done. And here you are years later now, you look back, and it would have been really easy to wave the white flag. So I want to sit on that for a second. Was it, here you're teaching about the energy bus, talking about being positive. Jon is Mr. Positive. Was it hard to stay positive during some of those really, really stretching seasons between, yes, I'm leaving, and oh my gosh, this is what I make, and I don't know if I'm ever going to get to this number that I've got to be at by year 3? Was it hard to stay positive during that? And if so, what did you do to get yourself back to positive? What would you say?
The answer is absolutely yes. It was hard to stay positive.
Mm,
But what got me back, honestly, was a little bit of that. Like, I would call it pouring belief back into myself. I had to intentionally pour that belief back into myself. I had to say, almost in the mirror. Now, I'm not saying I did it all the time in the mirror, but I believe in you. You can do this. Keep going. Those affirmations that were a huge part of my childhood. So I really had to put that belief in myself, but I also had to do things that I'm sure you've talked about hundreds or thousands of times. Things like practicing gratitude, things that help us shift out of a negative mindset. I mean, the quickest way, and you've heard Jon Gordon say this a million times, but the quickest way to move out of feeling stressed is to feel blessed. And for me, I start every day with, thank you for the breath in my lungs and the heart beating in my body. And then I just let it flow from there. But on our worst day, we all have that.
That's
We
right.
all have that. On your absolute crappiest day, you have the breath in your lungs and the heart beating in your body. And for me, I usually do that while I walk my dog. And then I'm like, thank you for my puppy, and thank you for the sunshine, and thank you for this, and thank you, and it just kind of flows. But that grounding point for me is one that brings me back. And then I would say the last thing is probably just any type of action, any type of forward momentum. When you're feeling stressed and negative, it shifts you. If you're feeling stuck and stressed and on the couch or frustrated or mean or mad, you got to change up that energy. So go walk around the block, go turn on your favorite tune and shake it off. Do whatever you need to do to kind of get out of that stress, tension mindset. So yeah, those are 3 things I would do.
That's really good. And I appreciate you being transparent about that, because it's really easy from the outside to watch you speak or to hear you on a podcast or to see you and Jon do something together and go, man, I bet they're positive all the time. I bet life is never negative to them. And it's not, that isn't true.
No.
And you being willing to share that it's a really, really big deal. When you were walking through these seasons, I know you have a faith journey. What role did faith play in pulling Julie through some of the difficult seasons and the good seasons? What would you say?
Yeah, it's interesting. My faith journey is a lot different than Jon's and probably yours. But I grew up much more on the kind of spiritual side of the equation. I grew up going to a church called Unity, which is it's just different. It's more
Yeah.
spiritual, very open-minded, all the things. So that's how I grew up. I would say my path more toward the Jesus side of the faith journey has been really since I joined the Jon Gordon team,
Wow.
interestingly, because I am surrounded by leaders who lead with faith. I've
That's right.
learned more about God and Jesus and the Bible and all the things since I've been on this team than I ever have. I've prayed more in the last 8 years than I ever have. I've always prayed, but
Right.
it's different.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
it's just a different type of connection and prayer. So I would say I'm still learning.
Good.
If you asked me to quote a verse, I don't have all the verses memorized. I don't know every single Bible story. I've learned a lot of them over the last 8 years. I go to Elevation Church. I love Elevation. I've listened to a million Stephen Furtick sermons, and I love them. So I'm much more tuned in than I used to be, but my faith journey I started in a different place. So
Yeah.
it's a continuum. And to be honest, I think anybody should be able to worship in whatever they want, in whatever way they want to worship, right? As long as
Yep.
you're connecting to something bigger than yourself, for me, that is where it's important. So
That's a great answer, and it's an honest answer. And I
it is
appreciate
honest.
that because that's where a lot of people live. That is where a lot of people live. And it's the power, what you're experiencing now is the power of John's influence and the
Yes.
influence of his journey, which is the whole
Yeah.
point of this podcast, right? It's that when somebody leads with their faith out in front, it really is contagious. And a lot of times you look at it and go, that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
So that's the secret sauce behind all of this. So that is a very, very good answer. When you think about you're traveling, you're standing in front of so many audiences and training teams and doing all that you do now with the Jon Gordon Company, what's the biggest impact you hope you leave an audience with beyond the content? Because we all know the content. The content's fantastic. Beyond the content, when you walk off that stage, when you walk out of that corporate training that you may be doing with them, what do you want them to leave with?
Gosh, I mean, I guess a couple of things. First, I want them to put the things into action that we teach. I don't want them to go, wow, that was really cool. Like that was a fun training, or that was a great keynote, or whatever. And then now I'm going to go back to my office and keep on grinding. So my hope is, of course, that they will put something into practice. I mean, the ripple effect doesn't really happen if nobody does anything. So I hope that people will actually take some kind of action. But I think the other thing is I want people to feel my energy and my heart. I really do put everything, all my energy and my heart and my love toward the audience. And I want them to feel it and receive it. Because I want to pour into people. There are a lot of people who are really empty and their dimmer switches are low. And I want to help people kind of raise up that dimmer switch and feel a little more full after being around me in whatever way they're around me.
Can you feel that when you walk in a room? Let's say a company calls you and they said, hey, Julie, we want you to come in and train our team, train this group of sales leaders, take the energy bus or whatever content you're teaching at that time, pour into them. Have you been doing this long enough now to walk in that room and read the meter and see where they're at before anybody even opens their mouth? And if so, what are the indicators that you catch quickly that things may not be so well, or man, things in here are really great?
Well, the answer is I absolutely can read the room.
Yeah.
And I mean, you can get a lot from body language. I mean, I can see when people are sitting with their arms crossed and a big frown on their face, and why are you making me sit in this room? And, all the things. But I actually try to give a little bit of extra attention to the people that are giving me the most negative vibes. So instead of ignoring them, I tend to go extra at them. And I mean, I have had in my client events self-proclaimed energy vampires. And I'm like, oh,
Nice.
come on, let's go. Like challenge accepted. And I will just do everything I can to pour into them. Am I going to change an energy vampire fully in an hour or a half day or a full day? No. But I believe that in every setting, someone will take one thing. If they don't want to, they're going to take one little thing. And a lot of it is through what we're doing right now. We're telling stories. And you're going to hopefully tell a story. Like you said, the principles stand on their own, but hopefully you're going to tell a story that's going to resonate with somebody about a business challenge, about a struggle over here, a personal struggle, about whatever. And someone's going to, oh, she's a real person. She has challenges too.
Yep.
And I have challenges. So maybe there is something to this, right?
That's really good. There's a phrase we use a lot at our church, and I heard it from a guy years ago. That which is most personal is most universal. And
Yes.
when we as a communicator will say things, all of a sudden people find out, oh, so they're like me. Oh, they're going through that too. I understand that. And that's it's a unique gift to be able to share that struggle, to resonate with that energy vampire, whoever it is that may be a skeptic just sitting there trying to figure out if they're ever going to do this or not. You're going to speak in front of a lot of great audiences. Final question of the day. You're going to speak in front of a lot of great audiences with some just absolutely amazing leaders. But the greatest audience you've been given are that 20-year-old and that 18-year-old, because they've had a front row seat to mom when the lights weren't on. They've had that front row seat to mom when they're driving in the car and nobody's in there to hear her or see her. And they've seen you at your best. They've probably seen you at your worst, which they probably caused. All right. But they've seen you on both ends of the spectrum, right? What do you want the biggest takeaway for them to be about their mom when they're sitting there going, let me tell you about my mom and what she did for me? What do you want them to say?
I love that. That makes me want to cry. But I want them to say a couple of things. I want them to say, number one, she knows how to do hard things and get through struggles. One of the biggest things that has happened in our lives is I had breast cancer in 2019, and that was hard. That was really, really, really hard. And they were young teens and tweens at the time. And I did mastectomy, 5.5 months of chemo, radiation. I lost my hair and my eyebrows and my eyelashes and lots of surgeries and all the things. And it was a really hard time, but they saw me get through it. And they saw me not negative all the time. They, believe me, I had some hard moments. I mean, and I didn't feel good for a really long time, but they also saw me getting through it and going and doing these events with Jon and wearing my wig and putting on my ridiculous fake eyelashes and all the things. And just, they saw me living into my purpose, even while I was going through all of these horrible, very difficult things. And that's the second thing I want them to learn, that you can chase your dreams and you can do anything. They saw me leave my big corporate job and chase this dream and grind and build and slow going. And now they've seen me write 2 books. I launched a book last year, and then I just launched a book and journal last week. So they're seeing me chase my dreams. They're seeing me go out and speak. They're seeing me train others. They're seeing me hopefully make a positive difference on the world. So hopefully that means they can go make a positive difference in the world. So that's all I want to do, is model what's possible for my kids. And whether they get the message or not, I mean, to your point, like, kids are hard, and I pour the positivity all over them, and sometimes they roll their eyes. So, all I can hope is that they're repeating it when I'm not around. So, we're parents, we get the eye rolls. So, but those are the 2 things that I hope they take away.